everyone, this is Libby and I'm going to be talking about antibiotics today. Specifically the work of Paul Ehrlich and magic bullets. So in the 1890s, a German doctor called Paul Ehrlich built upon Koch's work. This is an example which shows how scientists build upon each other's work. Discoveries could only be made because of what others have done before. Ehrlich won the Nobel Prize for Medicine in 1908. So what are magic bullets? So people knew that antibodies, which are found in the body, attacked different types of microbes. Because of this, they were called magic bullets. Paul Ehrlich decided to create magic bullets that behave like antibodies using chemicals. Ehrlich argued that if certain dyes could stain bacteria, certain chemicals could also kill bacteria. This was the foundation of the idea of chemotherapy. Ehrlich found a dye called methylene blue that killed malaria germs, and he tried hundreds of compounds to kill the bacteria behind syphilis. He thought that he had failed to find a dye to kill syphilis bacteria, but the 606th compound tried, Salvarsan 606, worked. It was used on humans in 1911, and this was the start of the modern pharmaceutical industry. However, the second magic bullet to treat a different disease, not syphilis, wasn't discovered until 1935. The second magic bullet that was discovered was Prontosil. It was found by Gerhard Dommarkt, who worked for Bayer, in 1932. Prontosil is a red dye that contains sulfonamide. This killed Streptococcus microbe, but it also had bad side effects and could damage the kidneys and liver. So what was the second magic bullet called? As we just talked about now, we know it was called Prontosil, and it was discovered in 1932. So just to recap on Salvarsan 606, which was the start of the modern pharmaceutical industry. This was discovered in, let's just recap, it was discovered in 1911, and the second wasn't discovered until 1935, which was Prontosil. Antibiotic resistance. So despite these developments in antibiotics, scientists learned that they could be overused. If antibiotics were used too much, and not all bacteria dies when antibiotics are taken, then bacteria can evolve and become resistant. If antibiotics stop killing bacteria, then surgery and infections would be more similar to the Middle Ages. If the bacteria can't be killed, this would make surgery less common because more people would die from infections. The first resistant bacteria was called methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, or MRSA, which appeared in 1961. MRSA infections have been reduced after the NHS encouraged medical staff to wash their hands continuously throughout the day. This is consistent with Pasteur's germ theory and aseptical surgical methods, which I talk about in a previous episode, and things like disposable surgical gloves are useful for this. So MRSA was first discovered in 1961, as I just mentioned. So if bacteria can't be killed, this would make surgery less common because more people would die from infections. Also, antibiotics can be overused in humans and animals, as we just mentioned. And if antibiotics stop killing bacteria, then surgery and infections would be more similar to the Middle Ages, when mortality rates were a lot higher. So who discovered the second magic bullet? This was Gerhard Dommarkt, which, as we can just recap, was called Prontosil. And when did Ehrlich win the Nobel Prize for Medicine? This was in 1908. So as we just talked about MRSA, which is a super resistant bacteria, we helped to the NHS reduced the infections that were caused by it by first of all encouraging medical staff to wash their hands continuously throughout the day, and also by using surgical gloves. So that's everything with regards to antibiotics. Thanks very much for listening.